The desert stretched wide under the burning red sky, the kind of sky that made even the toughest men slow their horses and stare for a while. Miles Carter didn't stop. His horse's hooves beat a slow rhythm against the dry ground as he made his way back to his ranch. It had been another long day in town, selling 2 cattle, buying some feed, and nodding politely to people who barely noticed him. Miles had learned to live quiet, to keep to himself. Ever since his father died, the ranch had been his world, his work, and his only company. He didn't drink much, didn't visit the saloon. He didn't talk to women or strangers. Life had taught him that silence and distance kept a man alive in the Wild West. The sun was lowering, stretching shadows across the land. Coyotes howled somewhere far off. Miles adjusted his hat and pulled his worn coat tighter as the wind started to pick up. It was getting cold fast. He wanted to get home before night fully fell, but as he passed the old cottonwood grove, his horse started acting strange, snorting, jerking its head, refusing to move forward. "What's wrong with you, boy?" Miles muttered, patting the animal's neck. But the horse kept backing up, hooves digging into the dust. Then Miles smelled it. Something foul, something like burnt rope and death. His gut tightened. He climbed down, took the rifle from the saddle, and began walking toward the grove. The trees stood tall and black against the dying light, their twisted branches reaching out like old hands. Then he saw them. 7 bodies hanging from a long wooden beam set between 2 trees. For a few seconds, Miles couldn't move. He thought his eyes were playing tricks. But the closer he got, the clearer it became. 7 young women, their long black hair tangled by the wind, their feet bare and dusty, their dresses torn. He could see the marks of rope around their necks. The sight made him sick. He stepped closer, and that's when he saw something move. The girl in the middle, the one with a red cloth tied around her arm, twitched. It wasn't the wind. It was breath. She was still alive. "God help me," Miles whispered. He dropped his rifle and ran forward, grabbing his knife. He cut her down, holding her as she fell into his arms. Her body was limp, but her heart was still beating. He could see her chest rise and fall faintly. "You're all right now," he said, though he didn't believe it. Then he heard another sound, a weak groan from the end of the beam. Another girl was still alive. Miles moved quickly, cutting her down, then another. His hands shook, but he didn't stop until all 7 were on the ground. 2 weren't breathing, but 5 still clung to life. Their skin was bruised, and they bore signs of being dragged, beaten, and left to die. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, but none of them could answer. One girl, the youngest, no older than 15, tried to open her mouth, but only a whimper came out. Miles looked around. The scene was too neat, too deliberate. Whoever had done this wanted others to see it. A warning. A message. Maybe for the Apache tribe. Maybe for anyone who dared to care. He couldn't leave them there. Not like that. Not to die alone. He ran back to his horse and wagon, pulling it close. It took nearly an hour to lift them all into the wagon, covering them with his old blankets. By the time he finished, sweat soaked his shirt and his muscles burned, but he didn't rest. He tied down the ropes, jumped on the seat, and cracked the reins. "Hold on, girls," he muttered. "You're gonna live." The wagon rolled through the darkening desert, wheels creaking, horse snorting with exhaustion. The stars were beginning to appear, cold and distant. The night air turned sharp and dry, and Miles kept glancing back to check on the girls. A few of them stirred. One coughed, one cried softly. Miles had helped people before, an injured rider, a sick cowhand, but never something like this. These weren't strangers he could just drop at a doctor's door. These were Apache girls. In this part of the country, that meant trouble. The local townsfolk blamed the Apaches for every lost cow, every burned barn, every missing traveler. A man caught helping them could be beaten or worse. Miles knew it, but he didn't care. He couldn't ride away and pretend he'd seen nothing. His father had always said, "A man's worth is measured by the lives he saves, not the ones he avoids." Hours later, when he finally reached his ranch, the sky was black except for the moon. His cabin stood quiet at the edge of the desert, small, simple, and lonely. He stopped the wagon beside the barn, climbed down, and began carrying the girls inside one by one. He laid them gently on piles of hay, giving them what little comfort he could. He fetched water, tore strips of cloth from an old shirt, and cleaned their wounds as best as he knew how. Some had rope burns so deep he winced just looking at them. He gave each a sip of water, whispering softly, "You're safe now. You're safe." After a while, one of the girls began to stir more clearly. She had sharp eyes that caught the lamplight, and a scar across her wrist. She stared at him for a long time before whispering, "Why you help us?" Her voice was broken, her English rough, but her meaning clear. Miles didn't answer right away. He sat on a stool beside her, thinking about all the reasons not to help. The lawmen, the town hatred, the risk. But when he looked at her face, he saw the same thing he'd seen in his mother's eyes when he was a boy. Fear mixed with hope. "Because no one else would," he finally said. "And someone's got to." The girl tried to speak again, but her voice failed. She just nodded weakly and closed her eyes. Miles stayed there until she fell asleep. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing through the dry grass. Somewhere out there, a wolf howled. Miles looked toward the horizon through the window, uneasy. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right. Why hang them out here so far from town? Why leave them half dead? He stepped out into the yard, his boots crunching on the dirt. The night was silent except for the rustling of the barn door. He checked his rifle, scanning the dark edges of the desert. Then he saw it, a faint glow of fire in the distance, maybe 2 or 3 miles away. A campfire. Maybe more than one. Riders, he thought. He turned back toward the barn, heart pounding. "They're coming," he murmured. He didn't know who, but his gut told him the truth. Whoever had left those girls hanging wouldn't be happy to find them gone. He went inside, quietly bolting the door. The girls were sleeping or too weak to move. He loaded his rifle and sat by the window, watching the distant lights flicker. He didn't plan to fight unless he had to, but he would. As the hours crawled by, the firelights on the horizon grew larger. Dust rose faintly under the moonlight. Miles could make out horsemen, at least a dozen, maybe more. They were riding straight toward his ranch, and in that moment, Miles Carter understood. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something darker. Something cruel. The kind of thing that could swallow a man whole if he wasn't careful. But he wasn't about to back down. He glanced at the girls resting in the hay and tightened his grip on the rifle. Whatever this plot was, whatever evil hung over the desert tonight, he had already chosen his side. He would fight for them, even if it cost him everything. The moon still hung low when Miles Carter heard the first sound of hooves echoing across the hard earth. He had been awake all night, sitting by the barn window, his rifle resting across his knees. The girls were still inside, lying on piles of hay, too weak to move much. Every now and then, one of them moaned softly, half conscious, half lost in pain. He stood up, stretching his stiff legs, and peeked through a crack in the barn wall. Out on the horizon, dust moved like a ghostly wave under the moonlight. It wasn't one rider. It was many, at least a dozen men, riding fast and straight toward his ranch. Miles knew what that meant. Whoever had left those Apache girls hanging had come to make sure they stayed that way. He moved quickly, pulling an old tarp over the girls and whispering, "Don't make a sound. You understand? Stay quiet." One of the older girls opened her eyes, fear shining in them. She nodded weakly. Miles grabbed his hat, threw on his coat, and walked toward his cabin like a man just waking up for morning chores. He forced himself to look calm. His heart was pounding hard enough to make his chest ache. The riders came closer. Their faces were still hidden by dust, but he could see rifles and shotguns glinting in the pale light. When they finally stopped in front of his ranch, the leader rode a few steps forward. He was a big man wearing a long coat and a badge on his chest. The sight of that badge made Miles's stomach twist. It was Sheriff Colton Reeves. "Mornin', Miles," the sheriff called out, voice rough as gravel. "Didn't think you'd still be up this early." Miles forced a thin smile. "Didn't sleep much, Sheriff. What brings you and your boys out here before sunrise?" Colton climbed down from his horse, boots crunching against the ground. Behind him, his men spread out slowly, some heading toward the barn, others toward the well. "We're looking for something," Colton said, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Or maybe I should say someone." "Someone?" Miles repeated. "Ain't seen a soul all night." The sheriff stared at him, eyes cold and watchful. "You sure about that?" Miles didn't answer. He could feel the tension growing like a storm ready to break. Colton took a few steps closer. "Word is some savages escaped from their punishment last night," he said. 7 of them. Young girls, Apache, hung for murder. Some say a man cut them down before they were dead. Miles's throat tightened, but he kept his face still. "That so?" "Yep." Colton looked past him toward the barn. "You ain't seen nothing unusual, have you, Miles?" I seen plenty of unusual things in my life, Sheriff. But no girls. Colton smiled, a slow, cruel smile. Funny thing, Miles. Folks in town say you've been soft ever since that business with your father. Helping folks who don't deserve it. You got a kind heart, but kind hearts don't live long out here. Miles didn't rise to the bait. You can look around if you want, he said, hoping his voice didn't shake. I ain't hiding anyone, Colton nodded. Oh, I plan to. He gestured to two of his men. Check the barn. Miles's pulse jumped. Ain't much to see in there. Just old tools, hay, and one tired horse. But the men were already walking toward it, rifles in hand. Miles followed behind them, trying to think fast. The girls were under the tarp, covered in blankets and straw. If the men looked close, they'd find them. As they reached the barn, Miles stepped ahead and pulled open the door himself. Go ahead, he said. Take a look. The men went inside, their boots echoing on the wooden floor. One lifted a lantern, scanning the shadows. Another kicked at a pile of hay. Don't smell right in here, one muttered. Old barn, Miles said quickly. Rats live under the boards. You can hear 'em scratching if you listen. The man grunted and moved on. His lantern light passed just inches over the tarp, but the girls didn't move. Not even a breath could be heard. After a few tense minutes, the men came out shaking their heads. Nothing in there but hay and dust. Colton looked disappointed, though not surprised. All right then, he said slowly. We'll head out. But if you do see any of those girls, Miles, you'd better tell me. Ain't safe keeping that kind of company? I'll remember that, Miles said. Colton climbed back on his horse. But before leaving, he leaned forward and said quietly, You always been a decent man. Miles, don't make me come back here for a different reason. Then he rode off, his men following. Dust rose behind them, fading into the morning light. Miles stood there for a long moment, staring after them. His hands were trembling. When the sound of hooves finally vanished, he went back into the barn and pulled off the tarp. The girls gasped for air, coughing and crying softly. Miles knelt beside them, whispering, It's all right. They're gone. You did good. The oldest girl, the one with the scar on her wrist, struggled to sit up. They come again, she said weakly. They not stop. Miles nodded grimly. I know. That's what worries me. He spent the rest of the day tending to them. He gave them bread, water, and some dried meat, though most could barely eat. He cleaned their wounds again, speaking softly so they wouldn't be afraid. One of them whispered her name, Tala. Another said she was called Nahi. They didn't say much else. But when Miles asked what had happened, they looked away, eyes full of fear. Late in the afternoon, when the sun dipped behind the hills, Miles saw a dark shape in the sky, a buzzard circling low over the cottonwood grove. He knew what that meant. The hanging place hadn't been touched. No one had taken the bodies down. Maybe no one dared. That night, when the girls were asleep, Miles sat outside with his rifle. The night was quiet, too quiet. He thought about what Colton had said. Hung for murder. But that didn't make sense. Those girls didn't look like killers. They looked like victims. His mind went back to the marks on their wrists, the bruises, the fear in their eyes. Whoever had done this wanted it hidden behind lies. As he stared into the fire, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Tala. She was wrapped in one of his blankets, her face pale but determined. You should be resting, Miles said. Tala shook her head. I kill my people, she whispered. Not for murder. For land, Miles frowned. What do you mean? White men come, she said, her words slow and broken. Say Riverland is theirs. My father say no. They hang us. Say we steal horse, kill traitor. Lie, all lie. Miles's jaw tightened. Sheriff Reeves. Tala nodded faintly. Him and others. They take land. They want river. Gold under hills. They make stories so people not help Apache. Miles stared into the flames, anger boiling inside him. Now it made sense. The perfect excuse to drive out the tribe, take the land, and silence anyone who stood in the way. He looked up at her. You're saying the sheriff's part of it? She nodded again, tears in her eyes. They kill my father, then us. Say no one care. Miles's hands curled into fists. He had never liked the sheriff, but now he saw what kind of man he truly was. This wasn't law. It was greed dressed up like justice. You're safe here, Miles said firmly. I'll keep you hidden. No one's going to hurt you again. Tala looked at him with a strange expression, half gratitude, half disbelief. Why you help us, white man? He didn't answer for a long time. He thought of his father's voice again, of the lessons he'd learned growing up in a land where right and wrong often got buried under fear. "Because it's the right thing," he said softly. That night, while the girls slept, Miles stayed awake, loading bullets and watching the horizon. The sheriff would come back, and next time he wouldn't just ask questions. In the distance, thunder rolled across the hills, even though no storm showed in the sky. Miles took it as a warning. Whatever was coming wasn't just trouble, it was war. And by saving those 7 girls, he had unknowingly lit the first spark. The next morning came with a heavy silence over the land. The sun was already bright, but Miles Carter felt no warmth in it. His ranch looked peaceful on the outside. The same old barn, the same dusty yard, the same windmill creaking slowly in the wind. But inside the barn, 7 frightened Apache girls were hiding under blankets, afraid even to breathe too loud. Miles hadn't slept a minute. He kept thinking about what Tala had told him the night before, that the sheriff and his men had killed her father and the others for land and gold. It didn't sound like a rumor. It sounded like truth, bitter and ugly. He poured water into a tin cup and drank slowly, trying to clear his thoughts. He knew Sheriff Colton Reeves would come back. Men like him never left loose ends. Miles had seen his type before. Power-hungry, pretending to be protectors while robbing the weak. From the barn door, he looked toward the north ridge. The hills beyond his land led to the old river valley, the same valley the Apaches had called home for generations. It was rich land, green even in summer, and he remembered hearing about gold flakes found near the riverbed years ago. Maybe that was what this was all about. He walked back into the barn. The girls looked up nervously. Tala was sitting near the wall, helping one of the younger girls drink from a cup. "They hurt bad," she said softly. "Need medicine?" Miles nodded. "I'll ride to town," he said. "Bring back some herbs and food. But I can't be gone long. If anyone sees me buying too much, they'll start asking questions." Tala looked uneasy. "If they see you help us—" "They won't," he interrupted firmly. "I'll be careful." Before leaving, he showed them the small trapdoor under the hay. "If you hear horses," he said, "hide in there. It leads to the crawl space under the barn. Stay quiet no matter what you hear." Then he saddled his horse and rode toward town, heart heavy and alert. It was a long, quiet ride. The desert stretched out wide and endless, and every shadow made him tighten his grip on the reins. By the time he reached town, the sun was high, and people were already moving about. Blacksmith hammering, women sweeping porches, a group of cowhands laughing outside the saloon. Miles tied his horse and walked to the general store. Old Mr. Grady, the shopkeeper, greeted him with a half-smile. "Mornin', Miles. Haven't seen you since the fair last month. You buying feed again?" "Some food, bandages, herbs if you got any," Miles said. He tried to sound casual. Grady raised an eyebrow. "You get hurt?" "Horse cut its leg," Miles replied. "Don't want it getting infected." Grady nodded and started packing the items. "Sheriff was asking about you this morning," he said in a quiet tone. Miles froze. "About me?" "Yeah. Said he came by your ranch last night and wanted to make sure everything was all right." He looked nervous. "Like he's got something on his mind." Miles forced a nod. "Probably just making his rounds, but inside his gut twisted." The sheriff was watching him already. When he finished paying, he packed the supplies carefully and rode back toward his ranch, taking the long route through the canyon. He didn't want anyone following him home. The air there was cooler, the rocks tall and sharp like old teeth. He stopped halfway and looked down at the valley below, a quiet stretch of green surrounded by cliffs. An idea struck him. There were caves in that canyon, old ones half forgotten. His father had shown him one when he was a boy. "If you ever need to hide," his father had said, "this is where the desert forgets you." By the time Miles returned home, the sun was falling again. The girls were waiting inside, scared but safe. He handed out food and medicine, helping them eat. After they rested, he told Tala about the caves. "We can't stay here long," he said. "If the sheriff comes again, he'll find you. The canyon's safer. No one goes there." Tala looked at the other girls. They were weak, but they nodded. "We go," she said. "We trust you." That night they prepared. Miles packed water, food, and blankets onto the wagon. He made sure his rifle was loaded and tied a small lantern at the back. The girls climbed in quietly, covering themselves with tarps. The moon rose over the horizon as they left the ranch behind. The road was rough and the wagon wheels bumped over stones and roots. The girls clung to each other silently, afraid of the dark. Every now and then, Miles looked back to make sure they were still hidden. After 2 hours, they reached the canyon. The walls rose high on both sides and the air felt cooler. Miles guided the wagon into a narrow trail that led toward an old cave. He stopped, climbed down, and lit the lantern. The yellow light showed a wide opening hidden behind thorny bushes. "This is it," he said softly. He helped the girls down, one by one. Inside, the cave was dry and cool, with a flat space large enough for them to rest. Miles laid out the blankets and handed them food. "It's not much," he said, "but you'll be safe here." Tala looked around, then back at him. "You not stay?" Miles shook his head. "I'll come every day with food, but if I stay, they'll track me here. You'll be safer if they think I'm alone." The girls didn't argue. They were too tired, too broken. Miles stayed until they fell asleep, then stepped outside. The stars above looked brighter from the canyon floor, and for a moment, he let the silence wrap around him. But the peace didn't last. When he returned to his ranch before dawn, he noticed something strange, and the gate was open. He always closed it. His heart jumped as he ran to the barn. The door was half open, swinging gently. Inside, the floor was scattered with hay and footprints. Someone had been there. He looked closer. The trapdoor was uncovered. His heart sank. The sheriff had been back. Miles moved fast. He took what little gold and ammo he had, stuffed it in a saddlebag, and checked the rifle again. Then he saw something that froze him. On the barn wall, burned into the wood with a knife, were 3 words. "We know, Miles." His hand shook. The sheriff knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to make his life worthless if he stayed. He went to the well and splashed cold water on his face, trying to think. He had to warn the girls. Before sunrise, he rode back to the canyon, his horse galloping across the desert. When he reached the cave, the girls were still asleep, huddled close together. Miles knelt beside Tala and woke her gently. "They know," he said in a low voice. "The sheriff's been to my ranch. They'll come for you soon." Tala sat up, fear flashing in her eyes. "What we do? We'll move deeper into the canyon. There's another cave near the river bend. Harder to find. I'll take you there tonight. For now, stay quiet." He helped them gather what little they had and hid the wagon under brush and stones. Then he covered the trail behind them as best he could. As he worked, a shadow moved on the ridge above, a rider watching from afar. Miles couldn't see the face, but he saw the glint of a rifle barrel catching the morning sun. He froze, pretending not to notice. Slowly, he finished his work and walked back to the cave. The rider didn't move. By the time Miles sat down again, sweat ran down his back despite the cool air. He knew what that meant. The sheriff's men were already searching the canyon. That evening, when the sun disappeared and the first stars appeared, Miles whispered to the girls to get ready. He took the lead, walking through the narrow path with the horse following behind, pulling the small cart. The caves ahead were darker, colder, but safer. The journey was slow. The girls were weak, but they didn't complain. Miles could hear the faint echo of water somewhere. The river. They were close. Suddenly a shot cracked through the silence. The sound bounced off the canyon walls. The horse reared, screaming. Miles dropped to the ground, shouting, "Down! Everyone down!" Bullets hit the rocks, sending sparks flying. Voices shouted from above. Miles fired back once, not to kill, but to scare them off. The echoes of gunfire rolled across the canyon like thunder. Then everything went quiet again. Miles crawled to the girls, whispering, "Are you hurt?" They shook their heads, trembling. He took a deep breath. "We move now," he said. Before they find the trail, under the starlit sky, they pushed deeper into the canyon, stumbling through the dark until they reached another cave, hidden behind a curtain of vines. Inside, Miles lit a small fire. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were fierce. "They found us once," he said softly. "They won't again." Tala looked at him with quiet strength. "Why you fight for us?" Miles stared at the fire. "Because no one else will," he said. "And because what they did ain't justice." Outside, the desert wind howled through the canyon, carrying the faint echo of hooves far away. The sheriff's men were hunting them, but Miles wasn't running anymore. He was ready, and somewhere deep inside, he knew the truth would soon come out, about the gold, the lies, and the blood that stained the land. Had the girls eat and rest. He told them stories from his childhood, About his father teaching him to break wild horses, about the floods that once washed through the valley, about kindness that still existed in men if you knew where to look. The stories made them smile a little, even laugh once or twice. But by noon the peace was broken. A distant echo of gunfire rolled through the canyon. Miles froze. Then came another, sharp, closer this time. He ran to the edge of the cave and peered through the vines. Far off he saw dust rising on the ridge. Riders again, at least 6. The sheriff's men. He turned back quickly. "We're moving now," he said firmly. "Pack everything you can carry." The girls didn't question him. They had learned to trust his voice. Within minutes, they were ready. Miles took the lead, moving through the narrow trail that curved deeper into the canyon. The path was rough, and every sound of loose stone made his nerves jump. Behind them, faint voices echoed. The hunters were coming fast. Miles guided them into a dry stream bed that twisted like a snake through the rock. It led to a small grove hidden behind boulders, a place no one would look for people. He motioned for them to crouch low. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't move unless I come back." Tala grabbed his sleeve. "Where you go?" "I need to slow them down," he said. "Buy us time." She wanted to argue, but she saw the fire in his eyes. Miles slipped away through the rocks, moving like a shadow. He climbed higher until he could see the riders clearly. Sheriff Reeves was among them, his black coat flapping as he rode, his rifle resting across the saddle. Miles's jaw tightened. He raised his gun but didn't fire. He didn't want to kill unless he had to. Instead, he shot at a rock near their horses. The sound cracked through the air like thunder. The horses reared, and 2 of the men fell off. Miles fired again, aiming for another rock. Dust and stone exploded near the sheriff's feet. "Up there!" Reeves shouted. "He's in the canyon." Miles ducked back, moving fast along the ridge. He could hear bullets whistling past, hitting the rocks behind him. He kept running until he reached a narrow gap between cliffs, a place he remembered from years ago. His father had once called it Dead Man's Hollow because the wind there made strange howls. He waited, breathing hard. When the riders reached the opening, Miles fired once more. The sound bounced around the canyon walls, making it seem like there were many shooters instead of one. The men panicked and split apart, searching both directions. By the time they regrouped, Miles was gone. He ran back to the grove, his lungs burning. The girls were still there, hiding among the rocks. "We have to move again," he said. "They'll search this canyon from top to bottom." Tala helped the others stand. They were tired, but fear gave them strength. Together they followed Miles toward the river hills. The path was long and twisted, but the further they went, the safer it felt. The sound of hooves faded behind them. When they finally reached the hills, the air felt cooler and smelled of water. Miles stopped by a cluster of rocks shaped like old faces. "This is the place?" he asked. Tala nodded. "Yes, my father bring me here when I was little. He say the river hides what man should not find." They followed the stream until it curved behind a cliff wall. There, half buried under sand and vines, was a mine entrance, wooden beams holding up the dark tunnel. Miles stared at it. "That's why they killed him," he said quietly. "They found gold here and didn't want the tribe to claim it." He walked inside carefully, lighting a lantern. The walls glittered faintly. Gold dust sparkled in the light. There was enough here to make a man rich for life. Enough to make others kill for it. He turned back to Tala. "This is proof," he said. "If I can bring someone honest here, a marshal, maybe a soldier, they'll see what the sheriff did." Tala shook her head. "No one believe us." "They will," Miles said firmly. "They have to." Before they could speak more, a distant shout echoed from outside. Miles's blood went cold. "The sheriff's voice, they found us," he whispered. He blew out the lantern and motioned the girls to stay low. The sound of footsteps and voices grew closer. Then the sheriff's voice again, mocking and calm. "I know you're in there, Miles. You should have stayed quiet. Now look at you, hiding like an outlaw." Miles gritted his teeth. "You murdered innocent people, Colton," he shouted back. "You'll pay for it," the sheriff laughed. "You really think anyone's going to believe a rancher and a bunch of savages over me? You forget who writes the law out here." Miles aimed his rifle toward the cave mouth. "Then maybe I'll just make my own law." Gunfire erupted. Sparks flew as bullets hit the rocks. Miles fired back, his shots echoing deep into the mine. The sheriff's men ducked behind cover. The standoff went on for minutes, each side waiting for the other to move. Finally, a rock slide thundered from above. Miles grabbed Tala and pulled her back just as stones crashed down, blocking the entrance halfway. Dust filled the air, choking them. When it cleared, the sheriff's voice was gone. Miles coughed and looked at the wall of rock now sealing most of the exit. "We're trapped," he said quietly. Tala touched his arm. "There another way," she whispered. "Old tunnel goes to river. My father show me." They followed her through the narrow tunnel, crawling over stones and roots until they saw faint light ahead. It opened to the riverbank hidden by tall reeds. The cool air hit their faces like freedom. Miles helped each girl out one by one. They drank from the river, shaking with exhaustion. When the last girl climbed out, Miles looked back toward the blocked cave. He could still hear faint voices shouting in anger behind the rocks. "They'll dig through," he said, "but not tonight. We've got a few hours." Tala looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "You save us again?" Miles shook his head. "Not yet. Not until they can't hurt anyone anymore." As darkness fell, he built a small fire by the water. The flames flickered on their tired faces. The girls leaned against each other, whispering prayers in their language. Miles sat apart, staring at the river, his mind filled with what had to come next. He couldn't run forever. He would have to face the sheriff again, this time with proof, this time with truth. But as the stars appeared above the canyon, he didn't feel fear anymore. Only purpose. The river whispered beside him, calm and endless, as if carrying the spirits of those who had been wronged. Miles Carter made a quiet promise to the night. He would not let them die in silence, not while he was still breathing. The night passed slowly beside the river. The sound of water running between the rocks was calm, but Miles Carter could not rest. His body was tired, yet his mind would not stop turning. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of those girls hanging from the cottonwood trees. He saw the sheriff's cruel grin, heard the gunfire in the canyon, and felt the weight of truth pressing hard on his heart. By dawn, the mist lifted from the valley, and the sky turned pale gold. Miles rose quietly and looked toward the blocked mine entrance. The sheriff's men were probably still digging through the rock. He knew they would not give up until they caught him or destroyed all the witnesses. He turned to Tala and the girls. They were awake now, gathered near the fire, their faces thin and pale but their eyes steady. Tala stood when she saw him. "They come again?" she asked softly. "Not yet," Miles said. "But they will. We can't stay here." "Where we go?" she asked. Miles looked toward the far ridge. "To town," he said. "If we can reach the marshal's office, we might stand a chance. There's one man there who's honest, Marshal Dugan. He doesn't like Reeves, but he's afraid of him. If I can show him the gold mine, the truth, he might finally act." Tala frowned. "Town people hate my kind." "I know," Miles replied. "But if we run forever, they win. You deserve justice, not just hiding." He spent the morning building a small raft from broken logs tied with rope he carried in his pack. The river ran straight toward the edge of town. It would be a long ride, but safer than traveling by trail. The girls helped him gather vines and branches. Even weak, they worked together without complaint. By midday, the raft was ready. The girls climbed aboard one by one, holding on to each other tightly. Miles untied the rope and pushed off from the shore. The current caught them quickly, carrying them down between the canyon walls. The ride was rough at first. The raft bumped against rocks, spinning once or twice, but Miles steered it with a long stick. Spray hit his face, cold and sharp. The girls stayed quiet, trusting him completely. As the sun climbed higher, the river widened and slowed. They passed tall cliffs, dry trees, and old ruins left by miners years ago. Birds flew overhead, their cries echoing across the valley. For a brief moment, it almost felt peaceful again. Then Miles saw something ahead, a fallen tree stretched across the river. The water rushed around it, forming a small rapid. He turned the raft sideways, shouting, "Hold on!" The raft hit the trunk hard, cracking in two. Miles grabbed Tala's arm as the current pulled them apart. "Swim to the bank," he yelled. The girls clung to each other, struggling through the cold water. One by one, they reached the riverbank. Miles pulled Tala out last, both coughing and gasping. He looked back at the broken raft drifting away and shook his head. So much for the easy way. They rested for a few minutes, catching their breath. Miles looked around. The hills ahead were familiar. He recognized the edge of Pine Hollow only a few miles from town. They were close now, but danger waited there too. As they walked through the dry brush, Miles saw fresh hoofprints in the dirt, deep and recent. He stopped, crouched down, and touched the tracks. "They've been here," he whispered. "Probably heading toward town. The sheriff's already preparing his story, Tala frowned. What story? He'll say I kidnapped you, Miles said grimly. That I killed his men and stole gold. If we don't get there first with proof, the law will be waiting for us. They kept walking until the town's church steeple appeared in the distance. Miles stopped again, thinking hard. You all stay here, he said. In the old barn by the creek. I'll go alone and bring the marshal back. Tala grabbed his sleeve. No, she said. They kill you. He smiled faintly. Maybe. But I've been living half dead for years, Tala. It's time I did something that mattered. Before she could argue again, he left. He walked down the dirt road toward town, his hat pulled low, his coat dusty and torn. People stopped to stare as he passed. Women carrying baskets, old men on porches, children playing with sticks. They all looked uneasy. When he reached the sheriff's office, 2 deputies stood outside. They stiffened when they saw him. Well, look what the wind blew in, one of them sneered. Sheriff's been looking for you, Carter. Miles didn't answer. He pushed past them and walked straight into the office. Sheriff Colton Reeves was there, sitting behind his desk, polishing his revolver. He looked up and smiled, slow and poisonous. Miles, he said, you sure got a lot of nerve coming here. Thought you'd be halfway to Mexico by now. I don't run, Miles said coldly. Not from men like you. The sheriff leaned back, pretending to laugh. You killed 3 of my men in that canyon. You think anyone's going to believe your little story about gold and Apaches? They'll believe what they see, Miles said. He dropped a small leather pouch on the desk. It spilled open, and gold dust glittered under the lamplight. The sheriff's smile faded for the first time. Where'd you get that? From the mine you tried to bury, Miles said. The one your men killed for. Colton stood up slowly, his hand resting on his gun. You're making dangerous claims, Miles. Miles didn't back down. You killed innocent people, Colton. 7 girls. You left them hanging like trophies. I saved them. They're alive and they'll tell everything. For a long moment the room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. Then the sheriff's face hardened. You should have stayed quiet. Before he could draw, the door slammed open. Marshal Dugan stepped in, holding his rifle. I heard every word, he said sharply. Put the gun down, Reeves. The sheriff's eyes flicked between them. You don't know what you're doing, Dugan. I know exactly what I'm doing, the marshal replied. Been watching you for months, waiting for proof. Looks like Carter just brought it to me. The sheriff lunged for his weapon, but Dugan fired first. The bullet hit the desk, splintering wood. Reeves stumbled back, dropping his gun. Miles grabbed it and threw it aside. Cuff him, Dugan ordered one of the deputies, who hesitated but obeyed. The sheriff shouted curses as they locked the irons around his wrists. When it was over, Dugan turned to Miles. You'd better take me to those girls. Their word will make this case airtight. Miles nodded, relief washing through him for the first time in days. They're outside town, near the creek. By the time they reached the old barn, the girls were waiting. Tala stepped forward, clutching a piece of cloth in her hand. It was her father's bracelet, the only thing she had left. The marshal spoke gently. You're safe now. I'll see to it that justice is done. Tala looked at Miles. We live because of you, she said softly. He shook his head. You lived because you were brave enough to hold on. Word spread fast through the town. By evening, people were gathered outside the sheriff's office, whispering in disbelief. For years they had feared Reeves, but now they saw him for what he truly was. A killer hiding behind a badge. The marshal sent men to the canyon to check the mine. When they returned with gold samples and the bodies of the sheriff's victims, there was no doubt left. Reeves and his men were guilty. Days later, a trial was held. Miles sat quietly in the back while Tala and the girls told their story. No one interrupted them. Even the judge sat silent, his face pale. When the verdict came, Reeves was sentenced to hang for his crimes, the same fate he had planned for the innocents he wronged. When it was all over, Tala found Miles outside the courthouse. The sun was setting behind the hills, turning the sky red and gold. You go now? She asked. He nodded. My work's done here. The ranch is gone, but maybe I'll start somewhere new. Maybe I'll build something again. She looked at him quietly for a long moment. You have good heart, she said. My fathers say brave man never born from hate, only from pain. You brave, Miles, he smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I was just too stubborn to let evil win. The girls planned to return to their tribe's land under the marshal's protection. Before they left, Tala placed her father's bracelet in Miles's hand. "So you not forget," she said. "I won't," he promised. As the wagon carrying the girls rolled away into the distance, Miles stood alone in the dusty street, watching until they were gone. The town around him was quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm. He looked up at the wide sky, where the last light faded over the desert hills. The land had taken much from him: family, peace, years of loneliness. But it had also given him something back: purpose. He turned toward the road, the wind tugging at his coat. Somewhere far away, a coyote howled, and the sound echoed across the plains like a song of the West itself, wild, lonely, and alive. Miles Carter walked away without looking back. He didn't need to. The truth had been spoken, and the dead finally had their peace. And for the first time in a long, long while, the lonely rancher felt free.